in. As hopefully everybody is aware, we are going to be talking about subscriptions and data alerts here today. There's my contact info. I'll also have it at the end of the webinar for you guys in case you have any questions or comments or follow-up information that you happen to want after this. Any questions that you guys do put into the chat box, I'll try to keep an eye on it as I'll try to keep an eye on the chat box as we're going along here. And then towards the end, we'll be sure to answer some questions that you guys have there. And if I don't get to the questions, even the ones I do get to, I always go on and I'll do a follow-up blog on my website there on privilegehhack.com so that you guys can see all the questions and answers and go back and reference that if need be.
Your audio is a little bit choppy,
Right.
Brad.
So real quick before we
go
go here, I don't know.
A little bit
the only thing I might be
choppy.
able to do would be
Oh, kitten!
call in. Hang on one second. Let me stop sharing real quick and then reshare my screen and see if it helps any.
Okay, bear with us, everyone. We're trying to fix this audio issue. Yep, we're aware of it. Thank you, guys. Although I do rather enjoy Brad sounding like a robot, we are going to try to fix it.
Okay, can you hear me now, Rachel?
Yeah, much better.
Is that better? Okay, let's see when I share my screen here, and hopefully that doesn't screw all kinds of stuff up.
Fingers crossed.
All right, so can you see my screen now?
I can see your Windows icon on your desktop. And
Okay,
now a kitten.
there we go.
And now a kitten.
Okay. All right, is the audio a little bit better, hopefully?
Much better.
Okay. If it does that again, I'm going to go ahead and hit record here on my side too. That way we can take a look at the recording and see which one has better audio, just in case it does start going out in and out for us again.
Sounds good.
Alrighty. Okay, so as you guys, if you've been in any of my presentations before, you guys probably know I work for Pragmatic Works there in Jacksonville, Florida. I blog, I do speaking stuff, and general all-around Microsoft Business Intelligence goodness. So again, we're going to be talking about subscriptions today. Hopefully you guys know a little bit about subscriptions, kind of just high-level concept, what they are. If you're not familiar with them, we will go through a little bit of kind of use case here. So this may be a conversation that some of you have been involved in before. Obviously, it's probably not this exact conversation. Nobody is going to necessarily admit that they're lazy, but somebody generally says, hey, I need this ninja report every day, but I don't want to have to go out there every single morning and pick up the report, or I don't want to have to go get it myself every single day. It's something I need all the time or on this schedule. So is there anything that you can do to help make this a little bit more efficient? So the response is, yeah, let me see what I can do. Oh, that's pretty easy to do. We can build a subscription and we can go out there and we can say, every day I need to produce the ninja report and send it over to Susan in finance over there. But then Susan comes back to you and says, but make sure Becky doesn't see my numbers. I don't want her to be able to see my departments or my division's numbers inside the report. Well, that's where things become a little bit more difficult. So that's where we kind of have to start driving the report based on the actual user that's going to be getting it. So Becky needs a version of the report that only has her data on it, and Susan needs a version of the report that only has her data on it. And this may be something that you have to do across the organization. Maybe you want to do this for like different sales territories. Maybe you have 40 or 50 different sales territories. You don't want to have to go and set up 40 or 50 different subscriptions in order to be able to deliver that report on a daily basis. You want to be able to do that a little bit easier. And that's where the data-driven side comes in. So that top request there, can I get the Ninja report every single day? That's really easy to do with this subscription. We just go in, we find the Ninja report, and we basically set up a schedule that says every morning at 8 a.m. I want to send this report out to the following people via email. The second request there, but make sure this person doesn't see my data, or make sure that the report is customized, the data in that report is customized for a particular person. That's where we use the second subscription that we're going to talk about, and that's the data-driven subscription. So that way we only send out the data The report that goes to Susan only has Susan's data on it. The report that goes to Becky only has her data on it. Or we can do a lot of different things with the data-driven side. So we'll talk about those here in just a little bit as well. Okay. So ultimately, the solution to both of those problems is subscriptions. One is, again, just a regular reporting services subscription that it looks like most of you guys are probably familiar with already based on the poll. And the other one of those is going to be that data-driven. So we're going to be able to customize the delivery of that report much more than we can with just a regular reporting services subscription. Okay. So for those of you who haven't used subscriptions before, and kind of just to give everybody a real quick overview here, essentially what a subscription is going to do is it's going to deliver data on some sort of a schedule. That could be every minute, it could be every 10 minutes, it could be every day. You can tell it only on weekdays do I want to send this out. It could be once a month. Maybe you have some end-of-month reporting that you want to automate the creation of, those type of things. So we can very easily and very quickly and quite efficiently actually produce many different reports so that people automatically get those in their email inbox or they automatically get pushed out to a file share. So the data is available on the schedule that we need it delivered on, and we don't have to continually go out there and run that report. Now, just because you set up a reporting services subscription does not mean that you can't still get to the data. So you can absolutely still go run the report just ad hoc, just on demand anytime that you need to, but doing a subscription just allows it to be delivered on a set schedule. The nice things about the subscriptions, those next 2 points that you see there, are that they are available in a variety of formats and a variety of delivery methods. So you can produce these reports. If you build this in reporting services, ultimately, obviously, all these things have to be built in reporting services since we're talking about reporting services subscriptions. But once you do that, you can have the reports produced into a PDF, a Word document. You can have them exported directly to Excel. You can have them exported to an HTML page. There's a ton of different formats that you can actually have this data pushed out in. The most common ones are probably going to be a PDF, an Excel sheet, or a Word doc. Some of the other ones you can do like XML and those types of things as well. But those three there, the PDF, Excel, and Word doc, those are probably going to be your most commonly consumed formats of this data. As far as delivery methods go, we'll talk a little bit about this here in just another slide or two, but you have a variety of methods based on where the reports are actually stored that you can have these delivered with. That could be an email or just pushed out to a file share or a couple other options that we'll take a look at here as well. Okay. As far as security goes, anybody that's receiving these reports, they don't actually need to have access to the data or to the actual report itself. So anybody that receives a subscription, let's just take for instance, we have a daily sales report. Let's just say it's one report, everybody sees the same data, and it goes to maybe 10 territory managers inside your organization. Well, none of those folks, none of those 10 people that receive that report have to have access to the actual database where the data is coming from, because they get the report, it's sent to them in a PDF inside of an email as an attachment, and as long as they get that attachment, they don't actually have to have access to the data. Well, all these reports actually have to be deployed out to some sort of a reporting services server. Well, those 10 people that get the report, they don't need access to the reporting services server either. You can give them access if you'd like to, but it's not a requirement for them to be able to get a subscription. Okay? So the only thing that's required there from the recipient side is that they have a way to get the report, whether that's through email, which they obviously have access to, or they have access to a file share where maybe we're going to put that file out to. The owner of each of these subscriptions is actually the person who creates the subscription. And you see that very last point there, if you own the subscription, the only people that can modify and delete the subscription are either the owner, so whoever created the subscription, or any reporting services administrators. So if you're a member of the administrators group in your reporting services server, then you can modify and delete any of the subscriptions. If you are the subscription owner, then you can also modify and delete subscriptions. The caveat there is if you own a subscription, you can only modify the subscriptions you own. So if Rachel were to go out onto our reporting services server and create a subscription, and I went out there, there's no way that I would be able to delete or modify the subscription that she's created unless I'm an administrator on that server. Okay? If you do need to transfer the ownership, so let's say somebody's getting ready to leave the company, or maybe somebody's moving to a different department and they're no longer going to need access to or be the administrator of these particular subscriptions, you can transfer that. You have to do it programmatically. There's a sample method that you can call out there on MSDN, and you can only do that in SQL Server 2008 R2 or later. I don't believe that option is available in any way before 2008 R2. So that would be 05 or 08 included in that there. Okay. So transfer programmatically, only available in some of the newer versions of the product. Okay. So we kind of already talked about these two. We have two different types of subscriptions. We have just the regular SSRS subscriptions. Nobody's going to refer to that as a regular subscription. If you hear me just say the word subscription, that is going to be the regular one. If you hear me say data-driven subscription, that's going to be the second type of subscription there. So regular subscriptions, aka subscriptions, and then data-driven. Okay. So before we talk about the data-driven version, let's get started with some of the basics here. So we'll talk about the regular subscriptions, and then I'll actually show you guys how to set some of this stuff up, and we'll actually go through creating one of these here together. All right. Whenever I do the demos here, I'll mention this one more time, but whenever I do the demos, this is all based off the AdventureWorks 2012 reporting services reports and the AdventureWorks 2014 database. So everybody should be able to go back after this webinar and be able to follow through on any of these demos that we're going to take a look at today. Okay. So the one of the limitations of a regular subscription is that it's only static reports. And what I mean by static is you can only specify a single parameter. So let's say that we have a report that, again, shows us all of our sales by territory. Well, if I have the 10 territories that we talked about just a moment ago that's getting emailed out, if I wanted to set up just a regular subscription for that, and I needed to create a report or an output for all 10 of those different territories, I would actually need to set up 10 different subscriptions, because with a subscription, I can only specify one parameter. So in the case of that particular report, the parameter would more than likely be the sales territory. Okay. There's two ways that we can have the subscriptions produced. We can either schedule those, as I mentioned, that can be a day, a month, a week, a year, whatever that schedule happens to be, or whenever a report snapshot is taken. So we're not really going to talk about snapshotting of reporting services today, but you can set up your subscription so that anytime an SSRS snapshot is created, that we will also send out or kick off the subscription at that time. Okay. With your regular subscriptions here, the key is that every subscription is going to produce one and only one file. Okay. So again, as we run the subscription for a particular sales territory, it's only going to produce the single file. They're not very dynamic, so we have to tell it which territory that we want to run. Can't tell it to go run it for the entire company and then also run it for the following 4 or 5 districts based on the day of the week or those kind of things. So they're not dynamic at all. Whatever you put in there into the subscription is the only thing you're ever going to get out of that. Okay. And this last option, this last one here, this is actually true across all subscriptions, but a subscription, whether it's a regular or a data-driven, are tied to just a single report. Okay. So if you set up a subscription, you're setting up the subscription for that particular report. And I'll show you guys once we get into the demo here in just a second. I'll show you where you can go and see a list of all the active subscriptions inside of the environment so that you don't have to go hunting around for the ones that exist. Okay. So with a regular subscription, the delivery method, you'll see here we have 4 different delivery method types. We can push the report out to a SharePoint library. The caveat there being that it's only available, this option is only available whenever you're running reporting services in SharePoint integrated mode. So in 2008 R2 and prior, there was a separate little setup that you had to do. Once you get up to SQL Server 2012, that the reporting services SharePoint mode actually turns into a service application right there inside of SharePoint. So everything's managed fully inside of SharePoint. Okay, so caveat number one there for first option there, the caveat is just that it has to be running in SharePoint integrated mode. Second option, we already talked about this one just briefly. You can have reports emailed out to people. You do have to configure the mail options in SSRS. Unfortunately, on the laptop that I'm working with here today, I don't have email configured. I don't have an SMTP server and all that kind of stuff that I can connect to on here. So we're going to kind of skip over top of that one. But we will take a look at the file share option today and show you how to output some of these reports out to a file share. If you don't want any of these options to be available to your users, so let's say that you do have email configured in the environment and everything, but you don't want people to actually be able to set up subscriptions and have them delivered via email because you don't want to overload the Exchange server or for whatever reason that happens to be. You can actually go in, there's a file called RS Report Server Config, and you can actually remove these options. And once we get over to the data-driven side, I'll actually go and show you where that file is, and we'll actually take a look at it, and I'll show you how to remove these options, and I'll show you exactly what that does inside of the report manager once we get inside of there. So you can remove these options, you can limit that. That is available. The option to limit the delivery methods is available in both regular native reporting services as well as SharePoint integrated mode. Okay, so let's go ahead and hop into a quick demo here. We'll show you the regular subscriptions. I'll show you how to modify some of the subscriptions and also how to delete them. And then we'll go over and talk a little bit about the data-driven side of things. Okay, so I'm going to minimize there. I have a little Word document here that's got some information in it that we'll keep referencing here. I'll make this available online to everybody, as well as my slide deck, and I'll put some other information out there. The notes for my demos here that I'm going to be doing, I have some notes out there that I can toss up online for you. So I'll make sure that all this information that we're going to go through today is available on my blog either tonight or tomorrow, and I'll put the link out there for the recording once that gets created as well. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to launch IE, and we're going to go over to my report server. Now, what's going to happen whenever I go to my report server is you're going to see a little bit of an error pop up. And this is something that stems from UAC on the laptop and on the network, those type of things. So hopefully this actually loads here in just a second. I'm going to go ahead at the same time while that's loading, since it looks like it's taking a moment. I'm actually going to run this as administrator as well. And I'm going to go ahead and put the URL in there too. So what you see here is that my account, bradley.shack, does not have permissions to access the report server. So sufficient permissions weren't granted. I don't believe that this last part here was part of the error message in all versions, but just know if you ever see this, if you're confident that you have access to the reporting services server, but you're just not able to get to it and you get an access denied or don't have permissions error, just run IE as administrator. So that's going to be one of the key things here. So in the background, we have the one that I'm running as administrator. You can see here that everything is loading just fine. Okay. So quick setup again, we're looking here just at the Reporting Services 2012 sample reports that are available from Microsoft. They're out there on Codeplex. I have two folders here. All my data sources have one connection to Analysis Services, one connection to just the regular AdventureWorks database. So let me go over here, and I will actually show you which database that is. So I'm going to go to my local host here, databases, and you'll see that this is actually the one we're connecting to right here. It's just the regular AdventureWorks 2014. We're not going to be using the DW today, just the regular AdventureWorks 2014. The other thing I have out here are my two reporting services databases, and we'll come over here and we'll look at this top reporting services database here in a little bit when we get over to data-driven subscriptions. Okay, so that's just kind of a quick overview of the setup of my environment here. So if we go into our sample reports, what we're going to look at here is we're going to look at this territory sales drill down report. So let's go ahead and just run this one real quick. I'll show you guys just the data that's inside of here. So we'll give that a second to load. Okay, so real simple report, not a whole lot to it. You'll notice that I chose a report here specifically that doesn't have any parameters on it. We'll get to the parameters on the data-driven side. So just a really simple report here. Essentially what we want to do is just output a copy of this out to our file share. And so what we want to do is, hopefully this data gets updated all the time, and what we'll do is we'll tell it that on a particular schedule, how often do we want to have this report produced and put out onto our file share. Okay, so that's ultimately what we want to do here. Real simple report, and I'll show you how we can actually make that happen here. So if we go back into our report manager here, and I hit this drop down, the open menu next to my sales territory drill down. Keep in mind this doesn't work quite as well inside of Chrome. I know with the newer versions of SQL Server, especially or with 2014 anyway, one of the updates that they did was it's a much better experience inside Chrome. But if you're using version 2012 or earlier, you may want to stick to reporting services inside of IE, just because some of these menus, like this drop-down menu here, they don't render properly inside of Chrome. Okay, so we're going to hit the drop-down menu here, and then we're going to go over to either one of these two options here, either manage or subscribe. So subscribe is going to give us just a regular subscription. If we go to manage here, you'll see, and then we go to subscriptions. Here's our option for the regular subscription or the data-driven subscription. Okay, so I'm going to click on New Subscription, and what we're probably going to see here is a little error message pop up. So it says subscriptions cannot be created because credentials used to run the report are not stored. Okay, so what's happening here, and one of the things that you need to keep in mind when you go to set up your subscriptions, again for both types of subscriptions, regular and data-driven, is that for the data source, the credentials have to be stored inside of there, inside of the data source. So let's take a look at why that's the case. I'm going to go back over here to Home and Data Sources, and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to manage this particular data source. So the reason for this is you'll notice that we're actually using the Windows integrated security for this. I'm just going to a regular SQL server, using Windows authentication to connect and everything, and we're using Windows integrated security. So what happens when we tell it that we want to use Windows integrated security is it essentially passes my credentials, my Active Directory credentials at bradley.shact from this laptop into the SQL server, which happens to be local in this case. So what happens when we go to run this as when I open it up is it passes my credentials. The issue becomes whenever we schedule this inside of a data-driven subscription or inside of a regular subscription is it doesn't know what credentials to use. So when we say Windows integrated security, those are the Windows credentials for the user that's actually actively running the report. Well, if we do it with a subscription, it's being run unattended, so it doesn't know what credentials to use to access the report. So we always have to do a stored set of credentials in here if we want to run a subscription. Okay, so that is one of the key things to keep in mind here. Go ahead and type in my credentials there. In this case, again, I want to use Windows credentials, and then we'll go ahead and test our connection and apply it. Okay, so we should be good to go here on the actual data source side. So I'll go ahead and refresh that. You'll notice that my little warning icons here went away if you happen to see those, and we'll do the new subscription option. Okay. Alrighty. So what we're going to do here is we're going to tell it what method of delivery do we want to use. If you guys remember, I said that there were three potential options here for the regular subscription. That's the SharePoint library, which isn't available since we're running in native mode. There is the email option, which again, I don't have email set up on this particular laptop, so I don't have the option to send emails. And then the Windows file share. So that's the one we're going to go with here today. If I were to switch this over to email, it would give me some boxes to fill in here with like subject line and to line and those kind of things. In the case of the file share here, obviously, we have to tell it where we want to store the data. So again, back over here in my little document, I'm going to pull my file share. All I've actually done here, if we go over to my C drive, is I've created a subscription folder, and then I shared it on the network. Okay, so we'll use those folders here in just a little while with the data-driven, but for this particular one, all we want to do is just toss it into my computer, /subscription. A key thing here, this does have to be a UNC path. So if I were to try to do something like C:/subscriptions, it's going to give me an issue over here saying that it's not in UNC format. So this does have to be a UNC path here. All right, the report render format, so this is the list that I was mentioning. There's a lot of different formats that you can produce this report in. Again, the most common are going to be probably these three here: your PDF, your Excel, and your Word document. Okay, so we're actually going to choose, we're just going to do PDF, and then we have to give this credentials to access the file share. So just like we had to give the data source credentials to access my actual data inside SQL Server, here we have to give the subscription credentials to access that file share. So again, we're going to just do my same account. And next option here is going to be my overwrite option. So overwrite the file with a newer version. So, that's just like trying to save a document that already exists. You get a little pop-up window. It asks you if you want to save it. You're essentially telling it, yes, go ahead and overwrite that. This next one here, say do not overwrite if it already exists. What you're essentially doing in that case is if that dialog box pops up, you're basically telling it, no, don't overwrite it, keep the version that's already out there. Of course, you're not going to see any pop-ups because this is all going to run unattended. But that's essentially what's happening here in the background. And then this last one, increment file names as newer versions are added. What that's going to do is just add an _1, _2, _3 number as the files are created. So for demonstration purposes here, we're going to go ahead and say that we want to increment the files just so that we can watch these get created as we go here. All right. The next option here and the last option on this page and the last option for our subscription here in general is going to be the scheduling. So we can either do a shared schedule or we can select and we can create our own schedule. Let's talk about creating our own schedule first, and then I'll let you know how you can leverage the shared schedule here. So we're going to say select. And what this does is it's going to give us a page here to fill out how often do we want this run. So do we only want to run this one time? So we can say just run it one and done, but we want to schedule it for some off hours time to run. We can tell it again every month. We can tell it exactly which months to run on. Same thing with weeks, which day of the week do we want to run this on, and so forth. We're going to go here to hour just so that we can have, for our demo purposes here, we'll have this run, we'll just say every 1 minute, starting at 2 a.m. That's good enough for us. And then down here at the bottom, we can tell it when we want to stop this. So maybe we only want to run this for a day. We can tell it that we want to stop it tomorrow at 3 a.m. if we wanted to. So we can give it an end date here if we choose. Okay. So what this is going to do is every hour, or every minute rather, it's going to come in here and it's going to create a new report, and it's going to put an underscore at the end of it if the file already exists. Okay. So we'll click OK. It takes my password out of here whenever we go to another page. So we'll go ahead and type that back in, and we'll click OK. So while this is, I'm going to go ahead and let this run for just a moment, and while that's running, I'm going to show you how to leverage this shared schedule here. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And let's see here. So it's coming up right to the top of the minute. So we only got about 15 or 20 seconds to wait here. But what's going to happen if I sit here and I refresh this page? What you're going to see over here on this right side is the last run and the status are going to start filling in here once we get to 10:30 Central Time here. So I'm going to go ahead and just keep hitting refresh here for for just a little bit here. It generally takes a few minutes, or not a few minutes, but a few seconds to kick off the whole process here. So as we go, there you go. So it took about 11 seconds for this to start running. You can see the status there says it's pending. And again, if we keep refreshing here, at some point that status is going to switch from pending to complete, and it's going to give you the time. Okay, so we'll come back to that here in just a minute. And if we go over here to our folder, you can see that our report is actually being created. So there we see the status. The file sales territory drill down PDF has been saved to my file share out there. The last run was successful at 10:30 a.m. Okay. So I'll show you how to set up a shared schedule here, and then we'll come back and take a look at this again. So up here in the very top right corner, I'm going to click on the Site Settings button here. And under site settings, we have general security and then schedules. So if we go over here to schedules, I can actually create a new schedule inside of here and then leverage this across all of my different reports. So let's say that I have 30 reports that I need to run at the end of the month for some end-of-month processing. I can come in here and I can just create one schedule that goes for end of month. And we'll say that we want to run this every month on the first of the month. We'll say OK. And then you get the same status here that you would get inside of your reporting services report. What this gives us the ability to do here now, if we go over to our sales territory drill down, let me go ahead and refresh. We'll check the status. So it's created PDF1. If I edit this now, down here at the bottom, I can switch this over and I can pick any of my shared schedules down here at the bottom now. So we can leverage those across multiple reports. The nice thing about the shared schedules is that you'll see up here at the top we have this play or this pause and resume button. So if let's say that I'm running a report like every hour, but we have some issues with the report, we don't want it to get produced for a little while, just temporarily, I can come over here and pause it, and we'll see that the status switched over to paused. And once we get the data issues fixed, we can come over here and resume that, and you'll see the next run is on 10/6 at 2 a.m. Okay, so real easy to be able to come in and create shared schedules here and leverage those across all reports. Again, these schedules here, these can be used across the regular regular subscriptions that we just set up, as well as across the data-driven subscriptions also. Okay. So here you can see our report, it just keeps chugging away. Sales territory drill down, if we open these, are all going to be the exact same report here, just because no data is being changed on my server or on my workstation here. Okay. So I hit the middle mouse button there one too many times. Let me go ahead and pull that back up. And /reports server. Here we go. All right, so we've seen there, so you saw two things there. One, how to create that subscription, and then two, how to modify a subscription a little bit. So again, if we need to come in here and modify it from, just from scratch, we're just walking in the door one morning, or hit the drop-down button here, we can go to Manage, we go to our subscriptions, and we have the option to edit. Again, you saw we switched it over to that shared schedule there, and then put it, I didn't save that setting, but it's real easy to come in here and modify these. The other way to modify these subscriptions, or to see all of your subscriptions, is this little My Subscriptions button up here in the top right corner of the screen. So if we click on My Subscriptions there, this actually shows us every single one of the subscriptions. So from the previous menu, from this menu here, there's no way for me to know whether or not there's a subscription set up on any of these reports. The best way and the easiest way to be able to do that is to come to this page here. Again, you have the option to edit or delete any of these subscriptions. So now we've run the subscription a little bit. What we're going to do is we'll go ahead and we'll check this box here, and to remove any subscription, you just check the box and then push delete. Again, keeping in mind that the only people who can actually delete or modify a subscription are either A, the owner, so that's the person who created it, or B, is going to be any of the server administrators here inside reporting services. Okay. So back over here on my actual report, if I come over and I say Manage, and I go to my subscriptions, you'll notice I deleted it on one location, it deletes it on the other. One other thing to keep in mind here is that's also pretty handy is if I delete a report, it actually deletes all of the associated reports that get deleted. All of the subscriptions get deleted as well. If you do have any issues with the subscriptions, you have to go out onto the file system. You have to go find the reporting services log in order to see what's actually going wrong with those. So hopefully we don't run into any problems today, because I'll have to go and find that log file and see if we can figure out what the issue is. Okay. So regular subscriptions, fairly straightforward, pretty easy to just come in, create a subscription, and schedule it to either go to an email address or a file share. Right? So let's talk about something a little bit more interesting, a little bit more fun here, and let's talk about some data-driven subscriptions. Okay? The cool thing about data-driven subscriptions is that you can produce many different versions of a report and have them customized to the users that are going to be receiving them very, very easily. So if we have the report that we're going to look at today is actually going to be a sales order. So what we'll do is we'll walk through a scenario on how to create a PDF for each of the different sales orders that have been processed for a given day. So some of the situations where you may want to use a data-driven subscription as opposed to just a regular subscription is that situation we talked about where all the territory managers need only their data. So for security reasons, I can't get somebody else's data. So a data-driven subscription ensures that the file that gets sent to my email address only has my data inside of it. The situation we're going to walk through today is, let's say that you run a retail organization, and at the end of the day you want to produce all the invoices for everything that you sold. So you want to go through and every sale that was made on today's date, you want to go out there and you want to produce a PDF of the invoices so that you can print those, or so that you have a copy of those stored on your file share someplace for audit purposes later on. So that's what we're going to do today is I'll show you how to use one of the reports that we have to go out there and produce all the sales order details for each individual sale. So there may be thousands of sales on any given day, and we only want to create the report for those sales that were made that day, but we want to have one PDF for each individual sale rather than just one giant PDF that's potentially thousands of pages long. Okay? And then another situation is maybe you want to produce a report and put it on a file share for each of your, or a SharePoint site for each of your different stores. So maybe even if the data is all the same throughout each one of the reports, maybe you just need to, there's a dynamic list of people who need to get the report. You can, rather than just using an email group, you can store that information in a database, or maybe there's a list of file shares that you need to push a given report. It's very easy to be able to where these reports go to and the data inside the reports, as you'll see here in just a moment. Okay, so dynamic report output is really the key driver behind using the data-driven subscriptions. The way that we're going to get all those dynamic properties is we're going to use a query to pull the data out of a database. So we're going to write ourselves a little T-SQL query, and we're going to go out and pull all the different parameters that we need for our subscription into our reporting services subscription list here. So again, as I mentioned, we can customize this, vary the output. So if Bob in the Northwest likes his data inside of Excel, and me down in the Southeast, I like my data inside of a PDF format, I can actually vary the report formats for each of the different people that receive the report as well. And again, it does tie to a single report. Same options that you saw before, with the one new option here being this null delivery provider. That's a special one. We'll talk about that one after we build ourselves a regular data-driven subscription, or just a data-driven subscription here. With the file share, we'll come back and we'll build one based off the null delivery provider, and I'll tell you guys why that one's a special one here in just a few minutes as well. Again, same options, modify that RS server config file, and we can remove different options as well. Okay. So the report that we're going to go to this time, same report server and everything, this time we're going to go to my sales order detail here. If I click on my sales order detail, you'll notice that I have a parameter up here at the top that's SO and then the sales order number. So here's all the details for a particular sale. Well, what we want to do is basically go through all of our sales orders and pull the data out of the database, put it into this format here, and then put it into a PDF and store it here on my file share. I'm going to go ahead and take that one step further and say that, so my contact here, my customer, is listed on my report here. What I want to do is say, based on their last name, I want to put this report into either the A to M or into Z, just to give me a little bit better organization. I could go even a step further and say based on the first letter of their last name and categorize it that way, but I was a little lazy the other day and I didn't want to have to go through here and create a folder for every letter of the alphabet. So I got slightly less lazy and created 2 folders for the first and second portions of the alphabet here. So any last name that starts with A through M, the report needs to go into this folder. Any report that has the customer last name N through Z needs to go into this folder here. Okay, so that's kind of our use case at this point. So let's talk about how we actually set this up, and I'll show you. We can go in here. We can change the sales order number to a different one, and you'll see that it's a different person here. That there's a different total. Everything is completely different on the report here. Same format and everything, just different data. Okay, so we want to go through and create a copy of that report in PDF format for every single sales order. So what we'll do here is we'll go to Manage, same place we went before. We'll go to our subscriptions, and we're going to do a new data-driven, just a different button. And this is where you choose the, I'll show you guys the use to modify what shows up. And again, slightly cheating here. I'm going to copy this location. We're going to go to that on my file system here. And you'll notice that we have this file here called rsreportserver.config. .config is the extension on there if I had the known file extensions shown. If you ever make any modifications, I highly recommend you make a backup copy of this before you do. And what we're going to say is we're going to say open with Notepad. And I'm going to scroll down inside of here, just standard SQL Server stuff. We have the XML file here, and if we look at extensions, if you go and you try to find the section that says extensions, you'll notice each one of our different delivery options here. So we have the report server file share, so that's going to be your sending it out to a reporting services location there. Or excuse me, that's the regular file share. The reporting services one's a little bit further down. The extension name report server email, so that's going to be the option to email the data out. Here's your reporting services document library inside of SharePoint. So again, as you can see, some of these options here inside this config file are the same for both the native and the SharePoint. And then this last one down here, that null delivery provider, is the last one. So if we come over here, let's just say I'm going to go ahead and come in here and cut this. So if we didn't want our users to be able to select from this drop-down menu, if we didn't want them to be able to select the null delivery provider, we can save this. And when I refresh the screen, it's going to take just a moment since I did make a change there. It's, everything gets kind of cleared out of cache at that point and has to reload the page. But what you're going to see once this page gets done, since I removed that line out of the file, I'm no longer going to be able to select the null delivery provider from the drop-down menu here. So now that's reloaded. It doesn't exist in the XML file, so I can't select it here. I'm going to go ahead and add that back in and save this and let this refresh while we talk about that. So I can easily add that back in here, and the null delivery provider will show back up in my list. So if I didn't want to be able to say to allow anybody to send this out to email, just remove this section of the configuration file here. Okay. So while that's reloading, let's go ahead and take a look at the data that we're going to use for our subscription. So I'm going to copy this, go over here, and we're going to run this query. So essentially, this is a list of all my sales orders. So as you saw in that report, we had to have the sales order number in order to tell it which sales order we wanted to run that report for. So we're getting some data here. This is the folder where I want it to go to. And again, I've got I have a folder here. So I'm looking at the first letter of the last name to see if it starts with A through M. If it does, then it goes into that folder. If not, it goes through to N through Z. So we're just doing a little bit of logic there to build the folder string, and then the actual name of the file that we wanted to create. So because each customer can actually have multiple orders, I figure, well, what we'll do is we'll do first name underscore last name underscore sales order number. So you'll notice that the sales order number 53459 matches the file name here at the end. Okay, so this is the data that we're going to need, the query that we're going to need to run in order to produce all of our data-driven subscription files. What I did here, though, you'll notice that I've got this limited down. There's actually 30,000 or 40,000 different sales orders inside the database. I've got this limited down to just 125 here for time constraint. So Now that we're inside of here, we're going to say that we want this to go to a Windows file share. We'll give this a my data driven subscription. Give this a name here. And then we're going to say, where do we want this? Where do we want the data source for the query? So all data-driven subscriptions require a query in order to feed the data in. So we can either specify the credentials and the location for this query to run for this subscription, or we can use a shared data source. We've already got a data source out there, so we might as well go ahead and leverage that. So I'm going to hit the data sources here. Just navigate until you find that AdventureWorks data source or AdventureWorks AS or whatever your source system happens to be there. All right, we're going to click Next, and we're going to come over here and we're just going to paste in our query. We're going to hit Validate. You'll see that it validates the query, no syntax errors or anything like that, and we'll click on Next. So these are all the different fields. Obviously we've only got a couple of these different fields inside of our query there, but you can actually drive every single one of these options in that based on the query that we just wrote. So the file name, do we want this to be a static file name, or do we want to get it from the query that we just wrote? Well, each one of those files we want to create separate ones, so we're going to select the subscription file name field out of that query that we just wrote. So again, that's the subscription file name. It means when this particular record is run, that's going to be the file name that's produced. All right, the path, where we want this to actually go to. Well, again, we did that there inside we did that inside of our query here as well. That's going to be our folder. It's that file share, and then A through M or N through Z. The write mode, okay, we'll just specify a static value here, and we'll say that we want to overwrite any files that exist. Again, we have the same options as before. We'll say overwrite. File extension, we'll skip over this. Do we want it to include that file extension on there? And then the username and password. So if we have a different file share for every different store that we wanted to do, we could actually specify a set of credentials inside of our query for each of the different locations where we need to place this data. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing here. Password. And we'll click on Next. So once we've filled in all the fields here, report format, sorry about that, we'll do our PDF, and we'll say Next. And then the last one here, the sales order number. So this is a list of all the parameters that are on our report. In this particular report here, if you guys remember, sales order detail, we have only one parameter up here at the top. If we had multiple parameters, you would see multiple entries here, and you can data drive each individual one of those. So we're going to say here that we want to get this from the sales order ID field, and we'll click on Next. Again, we'll go ahead and set up a schedule here. So we'll say create a new schedule. When the report data is updated, that's the option there that you'll see anytime a snapshot is created that it will kick off this subscription here. So we want this to do it on a schedule. And again, just for demo purposes here to make sure everything runs while we're all sitting here, we'll do 10:50 a.m. and we'll say finish. All right, so we've got about 35 seconds before this thing kicks off here at 10:50, and then as you guys remember before, we had a few seconds delay there as everything validates and does all that. So again, if we sit here and we refresh this, you'll see this subscription status change here in just a moment. I'm going to go ahead and close out some of these other windows that we have open here and do a little bit of cleanup while we're waiting. And just to show you guys, both of these folders, the A through M folder and the N through Z, both of these are completely empty right now. Okay, and it's right there at the top of the minute. So again, here in about 10 seconds or so, it's going to take some time to validate this. You'll notice it still says new subscription, and you'll see this flip over. This is a little bit different looking once this starts running compared to how it looks on the regular subscription. So it still says pending, and it's getting everything ready. And this is the unique part about this compared to the regular subscription. So we know that inside of our file or inside of our query here, we have 125 different records. Well, if we sit here and refresh this, you can see how many of these are being processed, and if any of them have errors, it'll tell you the error count there. So it would say 125 processed and 13 of them had errors on them. Okay, so there we see the status is switched over to done. All 125 have been processed. And if I go to my A through M folder, you'll see there I've got 65 items. And if we go over here to N through Z, there's 60 items. So there's all 125 of our different reports. If we open this up, you'll notice that the name here on the report actually matches the file name over here. So we can go through there, excuse me, and we can see all the different reports that were created. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this one so it doesn't run on us again. But again, in 5 more minutes, it'll actually kick off and start running that same thing over again. Okay, so you saw very quickly, very easily there how we could take just a query from our SQL server, and we can use that to drive the output. So we could have told that to, you saw we incremented over each of the different sales IDs that we wanted. We customized the actual file name that got created, something we couldn't do on the regular subscription. We also customized the folder that we put it into, again, something else we can't do based on parameters inside the subscription. We could also go in and we could tell it that we want each of these to be in a different format, so that somebody gets it in Excel, somebody gets it in a PDF. We could also customize delivery methods and say that we want to do one set of subscriptions off of one delivery method and another off a different delivery method. So lots of different options that we could do here inside of our data-driven subscription. Okay. One other type of data-driven subscription that I want to show you guys is the null delivery provider. It works very much the same way, but it has a unique use for it. And the main use for it is going to be something called warming the cache. So if you've ever done analysis services work, you might have heard somebody say that we need to run some queries in the morning to warm the cache. Essentially what we're doing is we're going in and we're telling the reporting services report that we want to run it before everybody comes in the morning, so that all the result sets are already cached inside the report. What that's going to do is, rather than a user coming in at 8 a.m. when we get hundreds of people coming to the office first thing in the morning, and everybody hits that button at 8 a.m. that says, hey, I want to see the sales for yesterday, rather than us all sitting there waiting for that to spin and spin and spin because we're all hitting the database at the same time, we can go out there and we can warm the cache and pre-cache those report results, so that when we come in at 8 a.m., rather than it going from reporting services and pulling the data live from the database, it'll already have those results cached inside of inside reporting services, and it won't have to go get the data. So your reports will run much faster. And we can tell it, we want to do that every morning. Again, we can tell we want it to refresh particular reports every hour, and so on. So let me show you how we can actually use this and what benefit that's going to provide us as well. So I'm going to pull one more query here out of my Notepad document. I'm going to go over to my report server database, and we're going to say 9:25 at 10:50 a.m. Okay, so you see these are all the reports that got run after 10:50. You can see they're all coming live there, and those are all the different executions for that subscription that we just ran. So if we switch this over to 10:54, we shouldn't see anything. Let's see, 5:25 at 2014. 9:25, there we go. Eventually I'll learn how to type properly. 10:54 a.m. we can see that nothing's been run. If we come over and let's go back to that same report here, and we run our sales order detail report, come over here, refresh this, we can see that it ran it live. We can even come over here and we can see the different parameters that were used inside the report. If I run this report again, you can see that it still runs it live. Refresh, still running live. So what we want to do is say whenever somebody comes in and they run this report, we want it to pull from cache rather than going to the database and pulling the data. Because what we can see here is that data retrieval time, granted for this is not very high because it's a small report and I'm the only person running it, but if we had a lot of people out there running the report, this data retrieval time would just keep going up and up and up based on the server load. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a couple of different things and put them into play here. So we're going to go to Manage, and then I'm going to come over here to my processing options, and I'm going to say rather than do not cache temporary copies of this report here, I'm going to say I want to store cache copies of the report, and I want the lifespan of that cache to be 30 minutes. So that means every 30 minutes if I come over here now and I go back to my report and I run this, we should see this come live one more time. Okay, but now when I run this report again, what you notice is it now comes from cache. And you'll see the data retrieval time is 0. The only time that report spent was okay. Can you hear me okay, Rachel? Okay. Now it looks like my audio got restored. Sorry about that. I just got
you're
pop
good to
up
go
there
now.
saying the audio got cut off there for a second, so hopefully we didn't miss too much there. So what we want to do, though, so what this is going to do is if I run this report again, if I continually run this, it's still going to be pulling this data from cache. It's going to do that for the next 30 minutes, at which point the cache is going to be invalidated, and then it's going to go back to live for a run, and then back to cache over and over again. If I switch this to a different parameter, you'll notice that it goes back to a live run. So what we need to do is we need to take that data from our subscription and basically say for every single one of my sales orders, I want to run that report so that it caches the data. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to go back to my folder here and manage my sales order detail. And this time we're going to set up a new data-driven subscription. And instead of putting the report somewhere, we're going to use this null delivery provider. So warm the cache is what we're going to call this one. Again, we're going to specify a shared data source here. Okay, we'll say the AdventureWorks database again, and I'm going to use that same query that we used earlier. We're going to say next. And so there's no settings here for the null delivery provider. We're not putting a report anywhere. The only thing we need to do is tell it that we want to pull the sales order detail and that we want to schedule this. I'm going to schedule this to go every 1 minute, and we want this to start at 10:59 as we wrap up here. We'll say finish. We're going to give this just 1 second to run as we wrap up. Let me see if while this thing's getting ready to run, if there's anything I can answer here from the questions that maybe came up. Let's see here.
You have a lot of questions.
There are a lot of questions in here.
You're going to have like a 20-page blog after this. I'm excited.
Yeah, it happens. So there's a good question here. It says, are there any notifications for the failed subscription besides creating another report to show the failed subscriptions? Unfortunately, I don't believe there's any like email or anything like that you can set up that will notify you of any subscription failure. So the best way to do that's probably going to be to monitor the database there, monitor that file location, and see what happens, and see what's going on with that file system location there. So real quick while this thing's running, okay, it looks like it's done running there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull one of these sales order numbers, just a random sales order number here, and we're going to go over to my sales order detail. I'm going to run it for that particular one. And what should happen now, if we go back and look at this, is that one should have come from cache. If we go all the way down here to the bottom, so that we now have that last sales order number there come from cache. So it's a great way to be able to go out there, cache all the data for the reports. That way when people come in, no matter what parameter I would put inside of this sales order number right here, it would always have the data already stored in cache, and we wouldn't have to go out to the database to pick up any of that data. So a really easy way to be able to increase the performance on your reports there. The one last thing here, I've only got a slide for it. We don't have time to actually go in and show it. Data alerts, they're only available in SharePoint. Essentially, all that does is tells you that an event occurred and sends you an email telling you that something happened. It will have a link to the report inside of there, but there's no data actually stored inside of it. So that's a situation where you would say, you know, every day I want to check my profit margin, or every day I want to check the sales for a particular store. And if a particular store falls below an average sales number for that day, then I need you to notify me of it. And it's going to give you a link to the report, and you can set that up on different data points inside of reporting services there. So if you guys do have any other questions or anything like that, feel free to shoot me an email there. My email address is on the screen. Rachel, obviously, she always gives me a copy of all the questions that we have inside the chat box there. Since we don't have time to answer those today, I'll do all those and put those out into a blog in the next day or so. So be on the lookout for that. I'll send a link out to that on my Twitter account there once I get that posted as well. And I will also have the link to the recording once Rachel gets that put up a little bit later here, either today or tomorrow as well. So thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording on my end, Rachel, just in case we need that copy of it, just so we have it. And I'll turn it back over to you.